In 2007, a Russian submarine planted a titanium flag on the Arctic seabed 14,000 feet below the North Pole. This wasn't just a publicity stunt. It was the opening move in a dangerous game for control of the world's last unclaimed frontier. As the ice retreats, Russia has moved in weapons systems capable of striking the U.S. mainland while simultaneously claiming vast Arctic territories. The Cold War never ended in the Arctic. It just went into hibernation, and now it's thawing. The Great Thaw, how climate change is redrawing the Arctic map. What if I told you the fastest warming place on Earth is transforming into a new geopolitical battleground? The Arctic is warming at more than twice the rate of the rest of the planet. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It's creating an entirely new geographic reality with profound military and economic implications. The numbers tell a startling story. Since satellite monitoring began in 1979, Arctic sea ice has declined by roughly 13% per decade. The Arctic of today bears little resemblance to the Arctic of 40 years ago. Where once stood a nearly impenetrable barrier of ice, we now find increasingly open waters during summer months. The thickness of remaining ice has diminished by approximately 65% since the 1970s. What was once multi-year ice, thick, resilient ice that survived multiple summer melt seasons, is being replaced by thinner, more fragile first-year ice. Climate scientists now project that the Arctic Ocean could experience ice-free summers as early as 2035. This doesn't mean the complete absence of ice, but rather that the ice coverage will drop below 1 million square kilometers, a threshold that effectively opens the region to significantly increased maritime activity. Some models suggest this could happen even sooner, especially if current warming trends accelerate. This transformation isn't just a matter of academic interest for climate scientists. It represents the physical unlocking of a region that had been sealed by ice for thousands of years. As the ice retreats, it exposes shipping lanes that dramatically shorten the distance between major economic centers. The Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's Arctic coast, can reduce the journey from Rotterdam to Yokohama by approximately 40% compared to the traditional route through the Suez Canal. A ship traveling from Europe to Asia can save up to 2 weeks of transit time and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fuel costs. Similarly, the Northwest Passage through Canada's Arctic archipelago offers a potential alternative route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. While more challenging to navigate than the Northern Sea Route due to its narrow channels and less predictable ice conditions, it nonetheless represents a potentially valuable shipping corridor as conditions continue to warm. These aren't theoretical possibilities for the distant future. They're emerging realities that shipping companies and nations are already beginning to exploit. In 2009, 2 German commercial vessels became the first Western ships to traverse the Northern Sea Route. By 2021, nearly 2 million tons of cargo were transported through this passage. Each year, the navigation season grows longer as the ice retreats further and earlier in the spring and forms later in the fall. For Russia, this geographic transformation represents an extraordinary strategic opportunity. Approximately half of the Arctic coastline belongs to Russia, giving it natural geographic advantages in controlling access to the Northern Sea Route. The Russian Arctic contains critical infrastructure, including ports, railways, and energy facilities that support the country's northern development. As ice coverage diminishes, Russia gains increased access to these assets and can more easily project power across the region. The Russian government has made it clear that it views the Northern Sea Route as falling within its territorial waters and subject to its regulations. This position conflicts with the U.S. view that portions of this route should be considered international waters with freedom of navigation rights. This disagreement over maritime law and navigation rights creates a potential flashpoint as more nations seek to utilize these emerging shipping lanes. But shipping routes are only part of what makes the Arctic increasingly valuable. Beneath the retreating ice lies an extraordinary wealth of natural resources. The United States Geological Survey estimates that approximately 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas and 13% of undiscovered oil reserves may be located in the Arctic region. This represents approximately 90 billion barrels of oil and 1,670 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Additionally, the region contains significant deposits of rare earth minerals, zinc, nickel, and other materials crucial for modern technologies and renewable energy systems. As global demand for these resources increases, access to Arctic deposits becomes increasingly valuable. The melting ice makes these resources more accessible for extraction, turning previously unreachable areas into potentially lucrative development zones. This combination of strategic shipping routes and vast natural resources explains why the Arctic is rapidly becoming a focal point for military competition. Russia has significantly increased its military presence in the region, reactivating Soviet air bases and constructing new facilities equipped with advanced radar systems, air defense capabilities, and anti-ship missiles. China, despite having no Arctic territory, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and invested heavily in icebreaker technology and Arctic research. The United States, Canada, and other NATO members have responded with increased military exercises and surveillance operations. Consider what this means in practical terms. Areas that were once covered by thick ice year-round are now becoming navigable waterways during summer months. Territories that were once accessible only to specialized icebreakers can now be reached by commercial vessels and military ships for parts of the year. Resource deposits that were once locked beneath impenetrable ice can now be surveyed and potentially extracted. The Arctic's geographic transformation is having cascading effects on military planning, economic development, and international relations. Military planners must now account for potential threats from directions that were previously secure due to ice coverage. Energy companies are investing billions in Arctic exploration and extraction. Shipping firms are designing vessels specifically for Arctic conditions and plotting new routes through increasingly ice-free waters. This physical transformation explains why the Arctic is becoming the world's newest military hotspot. Climate change is literally redrawing the map, turning what was once a frozen, impassable region into a zone of competition. The retreating ice has created new geographic realities that nations must respond to whether they want to or not. Those who secure access to the emerging shipping routes and resource deposits will gain significant economic and strategic advantages in the coming decades. The competition we're witnessing in the Arctic today is driven by concrete geographic changes with real strategic implications. It's not abstract geopolitics, it's nations responding to the physical transformation of one of Earth's last frontiers. As the ice continues to retreat, the stakes of this competition will only increase. But this isn't the first time great powers have competed for control of the Arctic. During the Cold War, the region was a crucial front line between NATO and the Soviet Union, a place where nuclear submarines patrolled beneath the ice and early warning radar systems scanned for incoming bombers. The current militarization of the Arctic has deep historical roots in a previous era of superpower competition. Cold War echoes, the Soviet Arctic legacy Putin inherited. The Arctic wasn't always a frozen no-man's land as many imagine it today. During the Cold War, this remote region served as the front line of potential nuclear confrontation between superpowers. The Soviet Union created what was essentially a northern military fortress, a network of bases, airfields, radar stations, and submarine facilities stretching across its vast Arctic territory. This infrastructure wasn't built for show. It represented a critical component of Soviet nuclear deterrence and defense strategy. The Soviet military presence in the Arctic was extensive and sophisticated. Their northern fleet, based in the Kola Peninsula, housed nuclear submarines designed to slip under the Arctic ice and emerge undetected near American shores. Airfields dotted the northern coastline, allowing long-range bombers to patrol the skies. Radar installations monitored for potential American bombers coming over the North Pole, the shortest route between the superpowers. Entire military cities were constructed in the far north, complete with housing for personnel and families, schools, and cultural facilities. These weren't temporary outposts, but permanent fixtures of Soviet military power. Consider the scale of this Arctic presence. At its height, the Soviet Union maintained over 100 airfields throughout the region, dozens of radar stations, multiple submarine bases, and specialized Arctic military units trained for warfare in extreme cold. The Arctic wasn't a secondary theater. It was central to Soviet military strategy. The geography made sense. The shortest path for ICBMs between the Soviet Union and the United States crossed over the Arctic. Control of this region was seen as essential for national security by Soviet leadership. Then came the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The economic crisis that followed hit Russia's military particularly hard. Lacking funds for maintenance, personnel, or operations, much of this Arctic infrastructure fell into disrepair. Military units were withdrawn, bases were abandoned, and sophisticated installations were left to rust in the harsh Arctic elements. Satellite images from this period show crumbling runways, collapsed buildings, and abandoned equipment scattered across the landscape. The mighty Arctic fortress had essentially been abandoned. By the late 1990s, many Soviet-era Arctic bases resembled ghost towns. On Wrangel Island, once home to a significant Soviet air defense base, buildings stood empty with windows broken and equipment stripped for valuable parts. The radar station at Amderma, previously a critical link in the Soviet early warning system, was reduced to a skeleton crew operating deteriorating equipment. At Franz Josef Land, Arctic-hardened bunkers designed to withstand nuclear attack were now occupied only by polar bears. The withdrawal was so complete that on some remote islands, the only remnants of Soviet presence were environmental contaminants and rusting fuel drums. This created what military strategists would call strategic vacuum, an absence of power in a region of potential importance. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does geopolitics. As Russian military power retreated from the Arctic in 1990s, the groundwork was laid for future competition. This period of abandonment coincided with Vladimir Putin's rise to power, first as prime minister in 1999 and then as president in 2000. Putin's early presidency represented a turning point for Russia's Arctic strategy. As Russia's economy began to recover from the post-Soviet collapse, largely fueled by rising oil and gas prices, the new administration started reassessing strategic priorities. Though rebuilding the Arctic military presence wasn't immediately feasible given Russia's economic constraints, the Putin government began laying the groundwork for a return to the north. Early in his presidency, Putin approved a new maritime doctrine that specifically highlighted the importance of the Arctic to Russia's future security and economic interests. The timing was significant. Putin's rise coincided with growing international recognition of the Arctic's potential value. Climate scientists were documenting accelerating ice melt, oil companies were revising estimates of Arctic petroleum reserves upward, and shipping experts were beginning to discuss the commercial viability of northern sea routes. What had seemed like worthless frozen territory during Russia's economic crisis was starting to look like a region of immense strategic value. Putin, trained as a KGB officer during the Cold War, understood the Arctic strategic significance better than most. For Putin and the Russian military establishment, the network of Soviet-era bases represented more than just military assets. They were physical markers of Russia's historical claims to Arctic territories. Under international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a nation's territorial claims can be influenced by historical presence and use. By maintaining even a minimal presence at these former Soviet installations, Russia could strengthen its hand in future territorial disputes. The bases became important symbols in Russia's broader Arctic narrative, a story of historical presence, rightful ownership, and great power status. This historical dimension is crucial for understanding Russia's modern Arctic policy. The Soviet Union had invested tremendous resources in establishing its Arctic presence, not just militarily, but scientifically as well. Soviet ice stations, research expeditions, and icebreaker development had established Russia as the preeminent Arctic power. The abandonment of this infrastructure in the 1990s wasn't just a military retreat. It represented a humiliating national withdrawal from a region Russians had long considered part of their identity and destiny. Putin's government has consistently framed its Arctic policy in these historical terms. In speeches and official documents, Russian leaders emphasize continuity with Soviet achievements while portraying the 1990s as an anomalous period of weakness that is now being corrected. This narrative serves both domestic and international purposes. Domestically, it connects to broader themes of restoring Russian power and pride after the perceived humiliations of the post-Soviet period. Internationally, it reinforces Russia's claims to special status and rights in the Arctic region based on historical presence. Beginning around 2007, Putin initiated a systematic program to revitalize key Soviet-era Arctic bases. The pattern was strategic and deliberate. Rather than attempting to rebuild the entire Soviet Arctic infrastructure, which would have been prohibitively expensive, Russia focused on key locations that served multiple purposes, strengthening territorial claims, controlling access to the northern sea route, and providing staging areas for military operations. Kotelny Island exemplifies this approach. This remote outpost in the New Siberian Islands was home to a Soviet air defense base that fell into disrepair in the 1990s. Starting in 2013, Russia invested heavily in rebuilding the facility, constructing a new runway capable of handling fighter jets and military transports, modernized barracks for troops, and sophisticated radar systems. The revitalized base, now called Northern Clover due to its trefoil-shaped main building design to allow personnel to move between sections without going outside, can house up to 250 military personnel year-round. Similarly, the Nagerskoye Air Base on Alexandra Land in the Franz Josef Land archipelago underwent extensive renovation. Once a minor Soviet outpost, it has been transformed into one of Russia's most sophisticated Arctic facilities, complete with a 2,500-meter runway capable of handling all types of military aircraft year-round. The base includes advanced radar systems and air defense missiles, effectively extending Russia's air defense zone far into the Arctic Ocean. Temp Air Base on Kotelny Island represents another significant investment. Abandoned after the Soviet collapse, it has been rebuilt with modern facilities and an extended runway. The base now regularly hosts tactical aircraft, including MiG-31 interceptors and Su-34 fighter bombers, significantly extending Russia's air power projection capabilities in the eastern Arctic. These renovated bases serve multiple strategic purposes. They establish a permanent Russian military presence along the Northern Sea Route, allowing Russia to enforce its regulatory claims over this shipping passage. They provide early warning capabilities against potential aerospace attacks across the polar region. They create staging areas for projecting power further into the Arctic. And perhaps most importantly, they physically manifest Russia's historical claims to Arctic territories and resources. But Putin's Arctic ambitions go far beyond simply dusting off old Soviet outposts. The rehabilitation of Soviet air bases represents just the foundation of a much more ambitious strategy that includes new military capabilities, legal claims, and economic developments specifically tailored for Arctic dominance in the 21st century. Putin's Arctic fortress, inside Russia's militarization strategy. While the world focused on conflicts elsewhere, Russia quietly built the largest Arctic military force on Earth. But why? The scale of Russia's Arctic military buildup since 2007 represents one of the most significant yet under-discussed military developments of the 21st century. What started as rehabilitation of Soviet-era facilities has evolved into a comprehensive militarization strategy that touches every aspect of Russia's northern defenses and power projection capabilities. The timing of this buildup is telling. In 2007, Russia resumed long-range bomber patrols over the Arctic for the first time since the Cold War. That same year, a Russian submarine planted a titanium flag on the Arctic seabed at the North Pole, a symbolic gesture with serious territorial implications. These actions marked the beginning of a systematic effort to establish military dominance in the region. Since then, Russia has reopened or built from scratch over 50 posts and bases in the Arctic Circle, including 13 air bases, 10 radar stations, 20 border outposts, and multiple special forces training facilities. Russia's public statements about its Arctic intentions consistently emphasize peaceful development, scientific research, and safety infrastructure. President Putin himself has stated that Russia sees no potential for conflict in the Arctic, and that international law clearly specifies the rights of both coastal and other nations. Yet these diplomatic assurances stand in stark contrast to the aggressively military nature of Russia's actual investments in the region. The disconnect between Russia's rhetoric of cooperation and its actions on the ground creates significant uncertainty about its true intentions. At the organizational level, Russia established dedicated Arctic military structures that didn't exist before. In 2014, Russia created the Northern Joint Strategic Command, essentially an Arctic-focused military district, to coordinate all military activities in the region. This command brings together the Northern Fleet, now elevated to the status of a military district in its own right, with Arctic base ground, air, and air defense units under unified leadership. This organizational change signaled the Arctic's elevation as a distinct theater of operations in Russian military planning. Perhaps most notable has been the creation of specialized Arctic Brigade combat units, specifically trained and equipped for warfare in extreme cold. The 200th Motorized Infantry Brigade based near Murmansk and the 80th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade were reorganized as dedicated Arctic warfare units with specialized training, in operations at temperatures reaching minus 50 degrees Celsius. These aren't token forces. Together, they comprise around 9,000 personnel who regularly conduct exercises in Arctic conditions. Their training includes lengthy survival courses in polar conditions, long-distance ski marches, and specialized tactical scenarios relevant to Arctic warfare. Russia has also invested heavily in developing and deploying Arctic-specific military equipment. Standard military vehicles often fail in extreme Arctic conditions, where cold can crack metal, freeze fuel, and render ordinary lubricants useless. Russia has addressed these challenges with specialized equipment like the DT-30 Vityaz articulated tracked vehicle, which can traverse snow, ice, and boggy tundra while carrying personnel or military equipment. Trikol all-terrain vehicles with ultra-low pressure tires allow transportation across snow and ice without damaging the fragile Arctic environment. For its soldiers, Russia has developed the Ratna-Kartika combat outfit, which can reportedly keep soldiers operational in temperatures as low as minus 60 degrees Celsius. Naval capabilities remain central to Russia's Arctic strategy. The Northern Fleet has received significant reinforcement, including the addition of new ice-capable patrol ships like the Ivan Papanin class, which combines ice-breaking capability with naval armaments. Russia maintains the world's largest fleet of icebreakers, over 40 ships, including the only nuclear-powered icebreakers in existence. These ships serve dual purposes. They support civilian shipping along the Northern Sea route, while also enabling year-round naval operations in ice-covered waters. The Northern Fleet has also received new submarines, including Boryai-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines and Yazan-class nuclear-powered attack submarines. These vessels represent the most advanced underwater capabilities in Russia's arsenal. The Boryai-class submarines, armed with Bulava ballistic missiles, form a critical component of Russia's nuclear deterrent, while the Yazan-class boats provide long-range strike capabilities with Kalib cruise missiles. Beyond vessels and vehicles, Russia has deployed sophisticated weapon systems specifically positioned to control Arctic airspace and waters. The Bastion coastal defense system has been installed at key points along Russia's Arctic coast. These mobile units are armed with P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles with a range of up to 300 kilometers. From their positions, they can effectively target ships throughout much of the Northern Sea route and well into international waters in the Arctic Ocean. Russia has also established an integrated air defense network across its Arctic territory. S-400 surface-to-air missile systems have been deployed to protect key bases and infrastructure. These advanced systems can engage targets at ranges up to 400 kilometers, effectively creating large bubbles of protected airspace. Supporting these are shorter-range Panzer S-1 air defense systems for close protection and a network of radar stations providing early warning and targeting data. The air component of Russia's Arctic forces includes both defensive interceptors and offensive strike aircraft. MiG-31 interceptors, recently upgraded to the MiG-31BM standard with improved radar and avionics, patrol the airspace from Arctic bases. These extremely fast high-altitude interceptors are well suited to covering the vast distances of the Arctic. For offensive operations, Russia regularly deploys two 95MS and two 160 strategic bombers on Arctic patrols, along with two 22M3 medium bombers capable of carrying anti-ship missiles. Perhaps most concerning to Western military planners is Russia's deployment of electronic warfare capabilities across the Arctic. Systems like the Murmansk-BN complex can reportedly disrupt communications and navigation over an area spanning thousands of kilometers. Russia has established several electronic warfare units specifically assigned to Arctic operations, capable of jamming radio communications, radar systems, and even satellite signals, including GPS. These capabilities create significant challenges for NATO operations in the region and could severely hamper navigation in crisis situations. The strategic implications of this buildup extend far beyond the Arctic itself. The Bastion coastal defense systems and bomber forces based in the Russian Arctic can threaten North America directly. From their positions in the Arctic, Russian bombers can launch cruise missiles capable of striking targets throughout much of Alaska and northern Canada without leaving Russian airspace. Similarly, Russia's modern submarine force operating from Arctic bases can approach North American shores while remaining under the protective cover of Russian air defense and anti-ship systems for much of their journey. The Northern Fleet has been particularly strengthened to project power across the Arctic Ocean. Beyond its submarine forces, the fleet now includes the Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates equipped with Kalibr cruise missiles and potentially hypersonic Zircon missiles, giving them significant strike capability despite their relatively small size.